Director of Trauma Training at Community Connection.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Hyacinth said, I work at Community Connections, and we are a behavioral health organization in Washington, D.C., and we specialize in treating survivors of trauma, people who have experienced often physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, other types of trauma, such as community violence, racism, and so on. Hyacinth asked me today if I could join with all of you to talk about what is it like going through this COVID-19 pandemic, and how do we stay emotionally healthy and resilient during a crisis? And so that's what we wanted to focus on today. And first, Hyacinth, if you don't mind taking us to the first slide. So what is a trauma? And I like the definition, and I do want to state there are many different definitions of trauma. But I like the definition, anything that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. I think what's so important about that is what might overwhelm my ability to cope might not overwhelm you. So we want to be careful to never assume that someone is experiencing this as a trauma. And also recognizing that others are, and to not downplay what they're going through. Or, you know, if you have lost your job and your partner has lost their job and you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you know, very possibly that is a severe trauma to them. For some of us, what we might be experiencing is an extreme stress. And so what do we mean by an extreme stress? That's a state of mental and emotional strain caused by adverse circumstances. And I think that we can all agree that these circumstances are adverse, they're distressing, they're very difficult to navigate day to day. Also, that it's a mental, physical, or emotional factor that causes bodily or mental tension. So I do want to recognize here that many of us are experiencing this stress in our bodies and also mentally or emotionally. So in our bodies, you know, some of us are experiencing migraine headaches, aches and pains, other gastrointestinal things. And I think it's important that we recognize this, that oftentimes that can then cause us to wonder, do we have COVID-19? And yet they might be those, that manifestation of the stress that we're feeling. Because we do know that obviously the mind and body are very much interconnected with each other. But I think that that adds a whole nother level of stress, because then we're wondering, oh no, is this the first symptoms? So recognizing that stresses can be external, they can be internal, and also that stress can initiate a fight or flight response. And that complex reaction of neurological and our chronological, symptoms can come into play. So what do we mean by a fight or flight response? Some of you might find yourself being more irritable lately, also being possibly argumentative, maybe short-tempered, and so on. And so more of that, more of those strong emotions that are coming up because we're in an extremely stressful situation. Others of you might find the flight response. And I don't want to say, you know, obviously when most of us are supposed to be staying at home, what could that look like? But we need to recognize that different people have a flight response in different ways. You know, what if you are spending most of your time in your room? You know, maybe it's the home office where you're working from, but also recognizing that maybe what we're doing is we're exiting from the other people in our household to the other people. Maybe it's not responding to things at work, and that's our flight response. So I want us to think about, you know, what that might look like for us. Or is our flight response possibly sleeping a lot or taking naps every day? Is that a way to avoid or get away from what's going on around us, to not have to think about? So that's also a possible flight response. Hyacinth, is it okay if we go on to the next slide? So what are some of the symptoms of trauma? And again, trauma is experienced differently by different people, but often it's an intense fear, a helplessness or horror. And I think that many of us do have that intense fear. You know, what's going to happen? Are we going to be able to make it through this? The helplessness, when will this end? Helplessness in terms of if we are worried about people that we love getting COVID-19, the helplessness to be able to protect those people. When I see on the news people who want to go visit their relatives in nursing homes or other places where they're not allowed in, how that has to be incredibly, an incredible feeling of helplessness. You know, why can't I be there for the people that I love? I need to be there for them. Or a horror. Also just, you know, sometimes I think watching the nightly news can be horrific. So those can be some of the symptoms of trauma. And then how is it re-experienced? Having nightmares. I was reading an article today about how many people are waking up after having bad dreams, after having nightmares going through this. Also having intrusive thoughts of the event, even when you're trying to focus on something else. Are the thoughts of what we're going through intruding on our ability to concentrate on what it is that we're trying to accomplish? Do we feel detached from others? You know, obviously in this time of social distancing, we can feel physically detached, but do we also feel emotionally detached from others? I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the word dissociation, but what dissociation is referring to is that when we can't leave a situation physically, we find a way to mentally leave that situation, to kind of float away, so as not to experience the intense feelings that might be going on at that time. And so dissociation is basically a coping strategy that we have come up with, that we use in order to take care of ourselves. Many people are also experiencing sleep trouble, and also possibly an exaggerated startle response. That when someone comes up behind you, you know, it's kind of that experience of almost jumping out of your skin. Now, again, I want to be clear that many people might not experience this present situation as a trauma, but some of us are experiencing it as a trauma. Now, could we look at the symptoms of stress? Because the symptoms of stress, although there's some overlapping with the symptoms of trauma, they can also be different symptoms. So some of the emotional symptoms, experiencing depression. And I want to say that depression can manifest itself in different ways. You know, for some people, it's I know we all joke about whether or not people are taking a shower every day or every other day. But often we think of depression as not being able to take care of basic functions in life, and such as taking care of ourselves. And recognizing that, yes, maybe it just means, oh, it's nice to not have to shave. You know, if you're a man who's growing his beard, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're experiencing depression. Or is it more, is it fuller than that? Are you, you know, not sleeping too much, not getting out of bed, not functioning, not being able to do basic tasks of daily living that normally you would be able to do? Anxiety, obviously high anxiety right now, lots of worry about what's going on, what's happening to people that we love. But also that anxiety is about not being able to control what's going on around us. And so sometimes being over anxious. I was talking to a friend who her daughter, a teenage daughter, would sometimes meet some of her friends at an area park, was assuring her mother that they were staying 6 feet apart. But she was saying to me, I'm thinking of telling her that she's not able to do that anymore, because I'm not sure that she is, you know, and what if she gets COVID-19 and so on. So sometimes that anxiety for her really manifesting itself in, you know, I have to control everything that I can. And so this is something, not knowing if her daughter's really doing that, felt out of control for her. I mentioned before about the anger or irritability, but recognizing that often in situations like this, we are experiencing greater anger, easier to lose our temper, more irritable. You know, maybe you consider yourself a very patient person, but feeling at this time you're not able to to have that same patience with your children, with your loved one. Maybe it's with the people at work, or finding out that you have another conference call or another Zoom meeting, and finding yourself becoming very irritable about sometimes little things, feeling overwhelmed or unmotivated, maybe overwhelmed by what's going on, but also unmotivated to do possibly what it is that you are able to do for yourself, or what you would like to be able to do for yourself. We talked about with trauma having trouble sleeping, but also that's a symptom of stress, trouble sleeping or sleeping too much, but also having some difficulties with memory and concentration, not being able to be able to think as clearly. Have any of you seen on TV, they were showing this TV station, I think it was in Cleveland, where they had a feature where they were saying what day it was. And I think all of us have experienced that a little bit during this time, of not being able to remember exactly what day of the week it is, what day of the month it is. You know, hopefully we're able to say that it's April, but is it April 15th today or April 16th? And I think some of that memory and concentration, because we don't have the same markers in our life of going to work, of knowing that, you know, my child has ballet lessons on Wednesday nights, and that's a marker that you can remember Wednesdays by, or whatever it is, that we don't have those same markers. Also, a symptom of stress is making bad decisions, feeling like there's a lot of pressure to make decisions. And sometimes I think when we're under stress, it can be harder to think things through. They can be smaller decisions, such as, you know, what to buy at the grocery store, or what time you should go to the grocery store. But they can also be bigger decisions. If you are really stressed out about paying your bills, or what's going on, with what's going on at this time, are we making good decisions about what we can and can't do right now? And then some other symptoms of stress are the physical ones. Changes in appetite. They were joking on television about the COVID-15, meaning gaining weight. Some of us are eating more during this time, that it's comfort food and eating, and other people are not eating at all, that they're so stressed out that nothing appeals to them, and so on. For other people, it could be the headaches, or possibly the migraine and migraines that they're experiencing. For other people, they're experiencing that low energy, which can be hard to differentiate between depression, or is it low energy? Are we feeling unmotivated? And I think it's often a little bit of all of those. And for other people, it can be the upset stomach. Most of us tend to hold stress in our gastrointestinal system. And so having that upset stomach, you know, not being able to digest as well, and so on, that's a pretty common thing that happens when we're under high stress. Hyacinth, could we look at the next slide? So why are we experiencing acute stress? And maybe this slide seems obvious, but I want to lay it out, because I do think that sometimes we downplay what's going on, what's happening. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and she said several times during the phone call how blessed she was, and how blessed she was that her husband still had a job, that she did, that you know, she felt like her daughters were safe, and kind of going through the list. And I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't count our blessings at this time, but I also think that if we do that to an extent, we're not always recognizing exactly what's going on, and we're not being honest about this is still stressful. So why are we experiencing acute stress? Many of us, and I think that you know, that we would have to be silly if we didn't have some fear that we might contract COVID-19. You know, when you hear the reports that it isn't, I know at first we heard that younger people, it isn't affecting them, but now we're hearing reports that it is affecting different people differently. And so I don't think that any of us can get over that kind of fear that's out there. And then the fear that our loved ones might contract COVID-19. So maybe you feel like you're very healthy, you know, even if you do, you'll be fine and so on. But maybe you're worried for your mother, your father, your grandfather, your grandmother, whoever that is, that loved one who maybe is in one of those high risk categories. And that's real, that fear of what could happen to them and will I be able to be there for them. For many of us, the fear of losing our jobs. Is this going to happen? And is my workplace going to be able to continue to keep me employed? And for some people, it's not just I either have a job or I don't. I think we've all heard of people. I know that one of my nieces was asked to take a 25% cut in pay. And so even though she still has a job, she doesn't know how she's going to be able to make her bills. That for her is a pretty significant cut in pay. So that's another fear that's out there. And then fear of our loved ones losing their jobs. So maybe our job is secure, but maybe those other people that we love and care about, that we don't know if they're going to be able to make it. And then for all of you who are involved in these projects, you know, obviously the concern for, you know, many of you are entrepreneurs, you're directors of your agencies, you're concerned about the business that you're trying to run. You're concerned about your employees. That takes on a whole nother level of stress. So it's not just about paying yourself. And maybe some of you have decided to forego a salary in order to be able to pay other people who are in your organization. So that's a whole nother concern. So you have made that decision out of a really, you know, generous place, but still you're worried about how am I going to pay my bills, but also how long will I be able to keep this going so that I can pay my employees. And then your concern for your entrepreneurs. Many of them are just starting up their businesses. They have fledgling businesses. You know, are they going to be able to make it? And many of them were already living, you know, kind of very hand to mouth as it was. And now this brings in a whole nother level of uncertainty, of anxiety. And then the last point, anxiety over an uncertain future. I think that all of us, you know, are experiencing that anxiety of not knowing when will this end, what will things be like when it does end, and then also the worry about will the virus come back, and then, you know, if we start restarting our lives and our businesses, I think everyone, again, we want to know when are we going to get back to normal. Well, what if we do reopen and then the virus comes back? Will we have to do this again? And I think all of us have thought to ourselves, can I do this again? Can I go through this kind of financial hardship, this anxiety, all of this stress again if we have to go through this? And that worry that, you know, will this continue for a period of time? And, you know, if you're feeling resilient now, wondering how will I be able to remain resilient throughout this crisis. Hyacinth, could we go on to the next slide? So what can we do to reduce our stress? I think one of the things that's very important is to be able to name it, to try not to minimize it, to not have shame about this, to not, I think that one of the things that we often do is we stay strong for other people. We believe, and I'm sure that most of you see yourselves as incredibly capable, strong people, and we believe that we should be able to handle anything that comes our way. And it's not always that easy, is it? It's not always that easy to be able to handle this level of stress. Or, you know, I think we can all safely say that we've never been through a pandemic such as this before. And so we don't know exactly how to handle it. And there is no shame in admitting that we are stressed out. And to not deny that this is happening to us, to not deny that we're feeling stress, to not deny it to other people, but to be able to talk about it. I was talking to someone else who mentioned that they were mainly feeling bored through this. And I'm not saying that bored isn't what some of us are feeling sometimes. But I also don't want to minimize the fact that underneath that boredom, it gives us a lot of time to be able to ruminate on what's going on. So again, at the same time, it's not as if you're feeling one but not the other. You don't have to say that you're bored, therefore I'm not stressed out, that we can be both of those at the same time. The next one, and maybe some of you think, wow, the Serenity Prayer, why is she bringing that up? I just think it's a really good time for us to remember. And if you all remember the Serenity Prayer, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that in this time of COVID-19, there's so much that we can't control. You know, we can't control the virus. We can't control who gets it. We can't control whether or not we can get a test. We can't always control whether or not, you know, maybe some of your small businesses applied for one of the government assistance loans and feeling no control over that. And what we know for trauma survivors, and I think that this goes for all of us generally, is that we need to have some control in our lives, that we feel better about ourselves and our lives if we have some power and control. Certainly trauma survivors feel better, you know, that often perpetrators took away their power and control. So they're trying to, I think we're all trying to get some of that control back. And I think in a situation like that, like such as this, we don't know what can I control. So much of it seems, you know, way outside of our purview. So that's why I want you to ask yourself, what can I control? Because you will feel safer if you have some control. So I think some of the obvious things that we can control. We control our social distancing, whether or not we wear a mask in public. Are we able to limit our trips to the grocery store? Are we washing our hands as often as we can? Are we touching our face? Or are we trying not to touch our face, I should say. We also feel more in control when we have a schedule. And I know that this is something that I have really had to work on, making a schedule for myself, even though I'm teleworking, and having that schedule makes me feel like, okay, I know what time I'm going to get up. I know what time I'm going to start teleworking. I made a schedule for myself in terms of a break and in terms of lunch and so on. That to me feels more normal. And in normalcy, there is safety, that I have a greater idea of what I'm looking forward to, what I know is going to happen next. And I know that maybe in this time when it feels like one day is running into another, what's the need for a schedule? And yet I think that there's even more of a need that we stick to that schedule. And part of that schedule could also be things like deciding, even putting on the schedule what days you are going to go to the grocery store. Or I have worked into my schedule that I'm going to reach out to at least 2 people in my network every day. And sometimes it's more than that, but making sure that even though I am physically distancing from people, that I'm not emotionally distancing from those people that I care about. So I've tried to set some goals for myself and some targets, and that has become part of my schedule. I'm also want to encourage all of you to do some self-soothing strategies. And I would like to hear if you would be willing to write into in the chat box, what are some of the self-soothing strategies that you're doing in order to be able to get through this time? You know, are you exercising? Are you making sure that you take a walk? Are you, I think many of us are binge watching on TV. And are you careful about what you watch? I know that at first they were reporting that a lot of people were watching a couple of movies about pandemics, and I can't think of the names of them right now. But is that really what we want to watch during this time? Or is it more helpful to watch something, you know, light and fluffy, a comedy and so on? Are you doing things, are there comfort foods? And I'm not trying to suggest that we should all overeat and so on, but it is comfort food for a reason, because we do find it comforting. I heard a report that more people are baking during this time. So Heather mentioned that she's walking the dog, she's baking, she's sitting outside when it's nice, and so on. Those are great. Thanks, Heather. But it's for some people, places, they're even having a hard time keeping yeast in stock, because I guess baking bread has become a favorite activity, or learning how to bake bread during this time. So is there something that you can challenge yourself to? You know, maybe there were hobbies that you thought of, you know, of doing before, but you never had time to do them. Is this a period of time where you could do that? I was talking to a friend of mine, and she and her family have been doing puzzles, and that's something that they can do together. She also likes it because then her teenagers, you know, it's some time away from the television and from Netflix and so on. And so getting them involved in a puzzle is something, you know, that they have been able to do, kind of self-soothing, coming together as a family. And then what are we doing to connect with friends and family? And, you know, again, whether it's calling people. So Jen mentioned that she's cooking, she takes a bath, she's hiking, having a cocktail. I like that. Has anyone done, maybe on Zoom, a quarantini, where you get together for happy hour, and instead of calling it a martini, it's a quarantini? And again, I recognize that some people are in recovery. I'm not trying to encourage alcohol use, but for other people, maybe that is something, it's a way to socially connect with other people. If we keep it in balance, if we do it in a way that is actually able to help us to feel better. And so anyone else willing to share what they're doing in order to self-soothe? What they're able to do with their friends, families, while still keeping the social distancing? All right, could we look at the next slide? So I just wanted to spend some time talking about the responsibility that all of you feel towards your entrepreneurs. And I like this quote, and I do a lot of supervision at work. And I use this sometimes with the social workers and the psychologists that I supervise. And I'm not coming from a religious point of view, but I do think that if I could explain this quote, we're not called to be successful, but to be faithful. And this is a quote from Mother Teresa. But when I say be faithful, I'm not just talking about, you know, praying and turning things over to God. But when I use this quote with the people that I supervise, what I'm saying is that, are you faithful to your job and your job responsibilities? Because recognizing at this time, we're not always going to be successful. Maybe you are working with entrepreneurs, recognizing that maybe they're having a really difficult time, and their business might not make it through this time. And we can take on and shoulder that responsibility, which can be incredibly, I think, wearing for us. It can add to that acute stress level. And so asking yourself, have I been faithful to my job and my job responsibilities? So have I made the referrals that I can for my entrepreneurs? Whether it's to be able to get funding so that their businesses can keep going, referrals for themselves, whether it's for the food bank, whether it's other ways that they might be able to apply for benefits. Have I made resources known? So have I looked up the resources that are available in my area? And have I made them widely available? Maybe it's not just to your entrepreneurs, but also to your staff, so that they know what is available, what's out there in order to help them. because I don't think at this time it's just the federal government that is offering resources. I know that sometimes some of the state governments are also having resource programs, but also some nonprofits are also offering some possible resources that might be helpful to people. And so am I networking with the people that I know to find out what those resources are? And then am I letting my entrepreneurs, my staff people, other people know what those resources? Have I been available? Have I made myself available? Sometimes it's not that I can necessarily solve their issues, but I can give them, you know, someone to lean on, an ear to be able to talk about what's happening. Sometimes what people need is emotional support. And have I made myself available? Now, again, I want you to do that in balance, because if we do too much of that, of making ourselves, maybe it can increase our stress level. So we still have to have boundaries, and we can't do that to the extent that we are harming ourselves or not making time for our families or for our self-care. And then, have I done what I can to keep their businesses open? Because we want to be able to look at, there's only so much I can do. But when I look at this quote, we're not called to be successful, but to be faithful, to think of ourselves and to be able to, at the end of the day, to be able to say, I have done what I could. Because what I believe, hard work doesn't guarantee success, but it does reduce regret. So I'm sure that many of you, most of you, are incredibly hard workers, and that doesn't always mean that we will be successful. But what we do want to have is to not have that regret that I wasn't faithful, that I didn't do what I could have done. And I don't want to regret later that, you know, maybe I could have made one more phone call or passed along one more resource to them. But I want to be able to be able to sit back and say, I did what I could. I also do that sometimes when I think to myself, is this person going to be successful? Possibly it's with their sobriety, with their business, whatever it is, that they still have a right to self-determination. So I'm going to do the best that I can to give them the resources, to make the referrals available, to be available myself. But ultimately, I then have to let it go. And I have to recognize that whether or not they choose to follow up on that referral or that resource is ultimately up to them. So my job is to make it available, and then to do what I can to make it accessible to them. And their job is to then follow up on it. So sometimes we're not always going to be successful, but are we able to be faithful to what we're trying to do? Could we move on to the next slide? So these are some resources that I wanted all of you to know in regard to. The first one is about nutrition during the coronavirus and how we can stay healthy by using good nutrition. Other articles about staying healthy, what we can do. The second one is about those things that we can do to try to be as healthy as we can, so that, you know, even if we do contract the virus, that it will be a minor case of it. But the next one is about resilience and how we can be resilient during this. And one of the ways that, you know, when we're always thinking about resiliency is about our ability to bounce back, our ability to handle difficult situations and to have the resources. And in this article, it talks a lot about being able to lean on others. Resiliency isn't always just about yourself, but it's also about having a support system. And are we willing to use that support system? The fourth article listed here is from the CDC, and it's in regard to daily coping and managing stress and anxiety. And so they have a lot of good tips there. The fifth article is from The Atlantic, and it's about a therapist's guide to emotional health during the pandemic. So what some therapists have recommended to the people. And I think there's one more resource that I'm not sure got onto the page. Sorry, maybe I had a few too many on this, but I wanted to recommend, and I also want to ask all of you, do any of you have an app on your phone, your iPad, whatever it is, but an app to help you to relax and to do meditation or guided imagery? And I think that those apps are incredibly helpful. There are a variety of them. Um, Ones that I use are, one is called Breathe. Yeah, Christine just mentioned that she uses Headspace. That's another good one. So Breathe, Headspace, and I also think there's, I have another one. It's maybe it's Mindset. I'm blanking on that third one right now. But I would also recommend, remember we were talking about uh, doing something in order to self-soothe and also to have a schedule? I think it's also good to, are we figuring in every day that we are going to do some type of a meditation, some type of way to calm down? I think it was Heather who mentioned that every night she does one of these before she goes to bed. And so can we build it into our daily schedule? Some people find it helpful to do it in the morning, kind of getting themselves centered for the day and using it then. Someone else in the chat also mentioned Calm. That is another one of the apps that is very useful. But recognizing that using meditation and healthy strategies, those are ways that we can stay resilient, that we can ground ourselves. I would guess that some of you have children who are home from school and you are trying to telework while you're also trying to help them with their school. How do we stay grounded when there's a lot going on around us? And again, how do we stay resilient during this time? I think that most of us think that we're masters at multitasking, but I think now for many of us, we're really trying to multitask all at the same time. And recognizing that that resilience that we have, you know, we all have resilient qualities that we're able to use on a day-to-day basis. But now what's happening during a pandemic, during a crisis such as this, is that the ability to ramp up those resiliency features. And how do I stay resilient when the stressors are so much more than they were before? Someone once gave me a piece of advice that whatever I'm doing now to take care of myself was probably only enough for the stressors that I have in my life now. So what does that mean when we take on a new stressor in our life? Well, it means that we have to increase the ways that we take care of ourselves. That whatever we have been doing was probably only enough for, if you can remember, the pre-COVID time. You know, that ability to self-soothe was only enough for back then. Now, what are we doing to increase that? And recognizing that we have to build that into our lives now. I would also recommend for some of you, are you recommending that to the people around you? Maybe it's the people that that work at the organization, to your coworkers, to your entrepreneurs. But I think we all want to recognize that these stressors that we're feeling, everyone is feeling those. And do some of us have the ability to reach out and to be that person who's encouraging other people to take care of themselves, and to just be able to say, even if you are working, at an increased pace, trying to keep up with all the changing, circumstances right now, are you able to turn to someone and say, how you doing? And really mean not just giving me that simple answer, I'm fine, but I really want to hear, how are you doing? And to be that person that reaches out to others. I was wondering if anyone is willing to possibly either unmute themselves and talk about what you've been doing, or maybe through the chat box if you don't want to unmute. but what has been the biggest coping strategy that has gotten you through this time? Anyone willing to share? Well, I will bring up something for me. I have 2 dogs, and I think that walking them, it has gotten me out into the neighborhood. I live in an area where it's pretty easy to social distance, even when I'm out taking my dogs for a walk. It's really nice for me to be able to see people and to still stay 6 feet away from them, to be able to have that interaction, um, and to be able to get that fresh air. I think it's hard to be going through this and not have that contact with other people. Do any of you find yourself just craving to do something that feels semi-normal? One of my neighbors, their daughter was turning 16 and just invited us over to kind of do a socially distant block party, you know, to wish her a happy birthday. It wasn't more than 10 people, but I have to say it felt nice to do something semi-normal, like, you know, having a cupcake with neighbors and wishing her a happy birthday. Anyone have those experiences of just doing something that, you know, that maybe before we never appreciated? Were any of you kind of like me, that sometimes thinking these social obligations, that's what they were an obligation? And now I find myself, because I have to admit I'm an introvert, but I find myself looking forward to, you know, the Zoom calls or the other ways of reaching out. And again, just walking my dogs and seeing people. So
Lori,
Christine mentioned focusing on my
Lori, hi, Lori. We have Deborah who's raised her hand. Go ahead, Deborah.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi, it's thank you so much for giving me a second to talk. So I have found that the things that I considered routine and mundane before, just as you said, have become so much more important. Just getting out and seeing my neighbors, now it's a true conversation, and we do stay our 6 feet apart, but I've seen my neighbors more in the last 3 weeks than I've probably seen them in the last 3 years. I have an amazing adult son with Down syndrome, and so he and I have started doing things that we had stopped doing because we were so busy going to events and things and putting together puzzles. We're having dance parties. We are telling each other jokes. It has been, it's hard, but at the same time, I really believe it's what you choose to focus on. And so we've been able to focus on some good, and, you know, taking meals to my Aunt Joyce, who's 87 and still works in her garden, has been a blessing for her and for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. That's really nice. And I think what you're talking about, appreciating the things that maybe we didn't appreciate as much before, but also having the time to do things that, you know, like having that dance party with your son or doing that puzzle that you didn't have time to do before, that now we do. And recognizing the gift that that is amidst, you know, the anxiety and the stress we're feeling, that there's also a lot of gifts out there. Anyone else willing to share?
In the chat featured, Lori, we have Christine who shared. Christine Langley.
Christine, I really like what you said about doing future planning. And I like it especially because I think for many of us right now, we're having a hard time focusing on the future because it feels so uncertain. But isn't this a nice time to take that time with your family to talk about investment, places that you want to visit? But I think also it's having a hopefulness about the future and that ability to dream. because I don't think that we want to lose sight of the fact that we are going to get through this together and that we will get through this. And so your focus on the future is a really nice way for us to recognize that this is difficult right now, but again, we will get through this. Christine also mentioned about focusing on clients, helping them through various projects, that sometimes it shifts our focus on ourselves and then puts the focus on them. And not just telling them what to do, but also doing it with them. Like you mentioned, the copywriting or the website design. I'm also wondering, Christine, if in the past you didn't have time to help them with the copywriting or the website design. So also maybe now you're feeling like I do have the time to be able to go the extra mile, to be able to do that. And again, can we recognize there the gift that it is to have this time to be able to do it? Yeah. Anyone else focusing on, possibly the hidden gifts during this pandemic? That ability to be thankful? For maybe the neighbors that you always knew, but, again, those relationships that you weren't able to necessarily nurture before. That now I think that those people in our neighborhoods can take on a whole kind of different meaning and, different ability for us to be able to self-soothe. Anyone willing to share what it's been like supporting their entrepreneurs? How has that been going? Have you had certain entrepreneurs that have been very resilient during this time, very focused on the resources? And maybe other entrepreneurs who are more having a difficult time, maybe more on the depressive end or lots of anxiety. And recognizing sometimes with anxiety, I'm wondering, sometimes they will call us more or email us more, which can sometimes feel like too much, but are we able to differentiate how people handle their own anxiety? So Christine, you mentioned it can be a little heartbreaking, but I'm trying to have them focus on making a 10-day plan and just focus on what they can do in the next 2 weeks. Yes, so I think making that plan is part of that, having a schedule. We feel more in control when we have a schedule, when we have a plan, what we know we're going to do. And also, I like the idea of focusing just on the next 2 weeks, that we can't project necessarily out in the future what's going to happen, but what can I do right now? I'm also wondering, possibly sometimes with the entrepreneurs also, helping them to recognize what they can change and those things, that the wisdom to know what they can't change. And are they able to differentiate between what's the possibility here and what things are possibly out of my control? What might I not be able to change or to do differently right now? But let's focus on what I can control. Anyone else have any comments on what it's been like, well, for their entrepreneurs? So Christine, you mentioned at the end of a coaching session, you asked them to tell you how they're doing emotionally, and you asked them what they're thankful for. Very nice. So you're giving them that space. And I think, again, not just to say I'm fine, but to really tell you how it is they're doing. And then also to focus in on those things that they can be grateful for right now. Very nice.
Heather Garner and I both work out of the same office as a lender, and primarily startup businesses. So obviously those are many of those are experiencing some problems right now. So we were proactive in that our agency decided to offer them the opportunity to pay interest only for up to 6 months until we can get through this process. And some of them felt like that they didn't need that at this time. We were glad to hear that from them. But we had a few that felt like that was something they'd like to do just to kind of take some of the edge off of their operations.
So you were able to also offer them some financial assistance to help them get through this time.
Yes, I mean that's our primary, our organization's primary function anyway is a small business lender for startups. We're not for profit,
But able to
and
go
we
even
help start.
a mile for them.
Yeah, we help startups that really have a difficult time getting loans through a normal banking channel. So our criteria is a little bit less stringent. And anyway, we were just proactive in offering them that opportunity to have interest-only payments.
That's very nice. Did you all see Jean's comment about doing a Zoom for the entrepreneurs so that they can support each other during this time? I really like that idea. I would guess that many of your organizations, you used to have groups at the organization where they came together to learn skills, to be able to talk, and what is it like for them if they have lost that opportunity. And so being able to give them some of that back by having the Zoom meetings so that they can continue to support each other. Very nice. Have other people also been able to do that, to get your entrepreneurs together so that they can support each other? I think that also takes some of the weight off of all of you to be their only support. Can they support each other? Other people have ideas about how they've been able to support their entrepreneurs. Can I also ask you another question? How do you think you're doing between the balance of balancing their concerns with also your personal concerns? Do you feel like you've come to a good place in being able to hold both of those at the same time? Because some of you have real family concerns that, you know, weigh heavily on you, and sometimes maybe feeling like I don't know that I have the energy to be able to hold all of that anxiety from my entrepreneurs. Anyone feel like they've come to a good balance between the two? Maybe feeling like their family's getting the short end of the stick? How are you all doing with that? So did you all see Christine's comment? Feeling like it's better than it was 2 weeks ago? I feel like I'm settling into a new normal. I don't like it, but I'm getting closer to acceptance. So sometimes, you know, it is, you know, that ability to accept those things that we can't change, that we don't necessarily like it. I don't know that anyone likes this new normal, but I do think, yeah, recognizing, you know, what has it been like to get myself to this place of having some type of a feeling of some control and some reduced anxiety. And Rebecca also said, yeah, that's kind of where she is too. Settling into it, getting closer to some acceptance about it. anyone, I don't know what it's like for all of you, but in the Washington, D.C. area, they've extended our stay at home until, I believe it's May 15th. And when I heard it, I wasn't surprised, but there was also a kind of, wow, another month of this. And trying to kind of wrap my head around, so what is that going to look like? And I want to say one of the first things I thought to myself is, I can do this. I've been doing this for almost a month now, and I can do it for another month. And recognizing what they say, that you're not just doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for other people. And recognizing that what we're doing is important. And so taking that piece of news about how long this might go on with some resignation, but also some resilience that I can do this. Whether or not I want to do this, whether or not I necessarily like it, but I can do this. And I think that having that sense of accomplishment is also incredibly important for us. So I have another question for all of you. What are you going to do? Thinking back to what I said earlier, that what you did to cope with the situation was probably, your coping strategies were probably only enough for what you were doing before COVID-19. Have you added things, or are you willing to add new things to your coping strategies list? Is anyone willing to download one of these apps and to try doing a meditation, a relaxation exercise? Anyone have a new strategy that we've suggested today? Whether it's a dance party, whether it's doing a puzzle, whether it is going out and talking to neighbors from 6 feet away. Anything that, I had a Zoom call with some friends, and one of them at the end of the call challenged all of us, can you say one thing that you're going to do extra this coming week? And I liked it when she said that, because it made me kind of commit out loud. All right, so Deborah said she's going to try an app for meditation. Yay, Deborah. And Rebecca said, yeah, that she's going to share this info with her clients. Good. I'm glad. And again, I think that we can all be part of the solution. And so sharing this information and sharing it, that it's okay for our clients to say, this is a hard situation. So also that this has been a challenging situation, but a blessing in disguise. Taking it day by day, making a list, getting things done before I have to go back to work. I have to say, one of the reasons I make a list is to be able to cross things off, and that I really like it when I feel like I've accomplished something. And I don't know if any of you are like me, but I want to be able to, when I, go back to work, to be able to look at that list and think of all the things I've accomplished during this time. The closet that I cleaned out, the mulching I got done, whatever it was. Deborah said she made a gratitude list each day and an accomplishment list of what she was able to get done, so she can focus on what I did, not what I didn't do. I really like that, Deborah. And Rebecca, yay, you're one of those people like me that like to cross things off of your list. I want to tell you, that is one of the things we can control, that, of feeling successful. And Christine I'm right there with you. Sometimes she makes a list after she finishes things to be able to cross it off. So I will do that. If it wasn't on my list, I will add it to the list and then cross it off to be able to give myself credit that I did another thing. And I want us all to feel resilient and accomplished, and that we can get through this, but also that we can help other people to get through this together. So Christine, you don't think we're normal by doing this? And I think it's a great strategy. Well, I want to thank you all for the work that you do. I want to thank you for the support that you're giving to your entrepreneurs, to your family, to your friends, to the people in your community, and to recognize, again, we can be part of the problem or part of the solution. And I think that working together, we can all be part of that problem, or excuse me, part of that solution of helping people get through this time and get through it the best that we can by staying emotionally healthy and staying resilient.
Thank you all.
Hyacinth, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you so much, Lori. That was very beneficial for everyone on the call. We will be sending out a recording of this so that you can share with your respective colleagues, friends, and family. And I just want to thank you for taking this time to connect with us so we can give you a little bit of information. And I hope you'll be joining us next week when we have 2 series from GoDaddy that will focus on one, digital presence, and the other one is teaching virtually or connecting with your clients, your customers virtually. So again, thank you all and have a wonderful week.